She had asked thousands of people for help over the years. But when the CEO stopped and knelt beside her, something in his eyes made her freeze. The downtown streets were crowded that December morning, executives rushing past the woman who sat quietly against the cold marble wall of the Sterling Corporation building. Margaret had positioned herself there for 3 months, never causing trouble, never raising her voice, just holding a small cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps. God bless." But when James Sterling, the billionaire CEO himself, walked out of those golden doors and saw her shivering in the snow, he didn't just drop coins in her cup. He did something that would make every witness that day question everything they thought they knew about power, pride, and second chances. Margaret hadn't always lived on these streets. Just 18 months ago, she had been someone completely different, a woman with a home, a career, a name that mattered. The divorce had taken the house, the medical bills had drained the savings, and the company downsizing had stolen her last chance at stability. At 53, she discovered how quickly the world could forget you existed. Every morning, she woke up in the shelter feeling like a ghost of who she used to be, invisible to the thousands of people who walked past her spot by the Sterling building. She chose that location specifically because it reminded her of her old life, when she too wore designer heels and carried leather briefcases through those very same doors. But none of the rushing executives knew that the homeless woman they ignored each morning had once walked among them, or that fate was about to reveal a connection none of them could have imagined. James. Sterling was known for his precision, his 3-piece suits, and his ability to close billion-dollar deals before breakfast. But that morning, something made him stop. Maybe it was the way Margaret kept her dignity intact despite her circumstances, sitting straight-backed even in the cold. Maybe it was the way she said Merry Christmas to people who pretended she didn't exist. He walked over slowly, his Italian leather shoes crunching through the fresh snow. "Are you hungry?" he asked, his voice softer than any of his employees had ever heard it. Margaret looked up, expecting the usual quick handoff of spare change, but instead found herself looking into eyes that seemed strangely familiar, eyes that held something more than pity. "I haven't eaten since yesterday," she admitted quietly. James didn't reach for his wallet. Instead, he did something that made every person on that busy street stop and stare. He removed his $10,000 cashmere coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Come with me," he said. "There's something I need to tell you." The security guards at the building entrance couldn't believe their eyes. Their CEO was bringing the homeless woman inside. Inside the warm marble lobby, James led Margaret not to the security desk for removal, but to his private elevator. As they rose to the 40th floor, she noticed his hands were trembling slightly. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret studied his face. Those green eyes, the slight scar above his left eyebrow, the way he tilted his head when thinking. Something stirred in her memory, distant and hazy. In his executive office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, James walked to his desk and pulled out a faded photograph from his wallet. It showed a young boy, maybe 8 years old, standing next to a woman in a kindergarten classroom. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. She knew that photograph. She had taken it herself, 25 years ago. "Mrs. Henderson?" James's voice cracked. "You were my teacher, the only person who believed in me when everyone said I'd amount to nothing." The room seemed to spin as memories flooded back. The troubled boy from the poorest part of town, angry and alone after his mother's death. The teacher who stayed after school every day to tutor him, who brought him lunch when she knew he had none, who told him every single day that he was destined for greatness. Margaret's hands shook as she touched the photograph. She had saved that boy, and now, a lifetime later, their paths had crossed in the most unexpected way. "I looked for you," James said, tears now flowing freely down his face. "After I made my first million, I went back to the school, but they said you'd moved away. I hired private investigators, but Margaret Henderson had disappeared." She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The little boy she'd loved like her own son was standing before her, now one of the most powerful men in America. "You gave me your lunch money when my father lost his job," he continued. "You bought my textbooks with your own salary. You told me that being poor wasn't a life sentence, that education and kindness could change everything." Margaret finally found her voice, weak and trembling. James, little Jamie? But you were James Wilson then. He nodded, smiling through his tears. I took my stepfather's name after Mom died, Sterling. But I never forgot you, Mrs. Henderson. You saved my life. The weight of the revelation settled between them. The teacher who had given everything to help a desperate child had fallen into desperation herself, while that child had risen to unimaginable heights. The universe, it seemed, had been waiting 25 years to close this circle. James took Margaret's weathered hands in his. You told me once that kindness creates ripples we can't always see, that helping one person might change the world someday. His voice broke completely. You changed my world, Mrs. Henderson. Everything I built. Every success I've had. It started with you believing in an angry, scared little boy. Margaret finally let her own tears fall, years of hardship melting away in that moment. I always wondered what happened to you, she whispered. I kept every drawing you made, every story you wrote. Even when I lost everything else, I kept them. James pulled her into an embrace, and for a moment, they weren't CEO and homeless woman. They were student and teacher, separated by time but connected by something deeper. You're not going back to the streets, he said firmly. Not ever again. But Margaret pulled back, her old teacher instinct still intact. I don't want charity, Jamie. Not even from you. He smiled then, the same crooked smile she remembered from that 8-year-old boy. It's not charity, Mrs. Henderson. It's repayment of a debt I could never fully settle. But more than that, I need you. My foundation needs someone who understands what these kids are going through. Someone who believes in them when no one else will. In that moment, Margaret understood that she hadn't lost her purpose after all. Life had just been preparing her for a different kind of classroom. 6 months later, Margaret Henderson stood in front of another classroom, this time at the Sterling Foundation's Youth Center, teaching children who, like James once was, had been written off by society. She wore professional clothes again, lived in a modest apartment James had insisted on providing. But more importantly, she had her dignity and purpose restored. James visited every week, sometimes sitting in the back of her classroom just to watch her work her magic with troubled kids. The security guards who had once shooed her away from the building now greeted her with respect. The executives who had walked past her for months couldn't meet her eyes, humbled by their blindness. But Margaret held no grudges. She understood that sometimes we all need to fall before we can truly see. Sometimes the seeds of kindness we plant take decades to bloom, but when they do, they create gardens we never imagined possible. Margaret had saved James when he was 8, and 25 years later, he returned to save her, proving that love and kindness never really disappear. They just wait for the perfect moment to complete their circle. Have you ever wondered if the kindness you showed someone years ago might return when you need it most? Do you believe that every act of compassion creates a ripple that eventually finds its way back home? Or perhaps you've been the James in someone's story, given the chance to repay a debt of gratitude you thought you'd never be able to settle? Share your story below, because sometimes the most powerful moments in life come from the connections we never saw coming. The circles that take years to close, and the reminder that no act of kindness, however small, is ever truly wasted.